Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with journalist and author Christina Patterson and The Spectator's assistant editor Cindy Yu. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. Well, the Telegraph reports that UK warships do not have the firepower to attack Houthi rebel bases in Yemen in response to their attacks on shipping in the Red Sea. The paper quotes former top defense officials describing the situation as a scandal. The Sunday Times leads with a report by its Insight investigative team that top universities are paying middlemen to recruit lucrative overseas students, despite the fact that they have lower grades than UK applicants. The Mail on Sunday leads with allegations that a charity in the Congo connected to Prince Harry operates what the paper calls an armed militia engaged in beating, rape and torture of indigenous people. The charity says it's aware of the claims and that they're being investigated, but says it has a zero-tolerance policy towards any human rights abuse. The Sunday Express says that Rishi Sunak is targeting people over 50, the so-called saga generation, with a raft of policy aimed at them to help him win the next general election. The Mirror, meanwhile, says that the Electoral Commission has accused the Conservative Party of trying to rig that election by changing the voting rules to boost their chances at the ballot box. And the Sunday People leads with claims that baby killer nurse Lucy Letby has been given a key to her own cell in what the paper calls a cushy private prison, much to the anger of her victims' families. And the Star has a story about a performance of Shakespeare's Scottish play being disrupted by a bout of wind coming from the audience. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code that you'll see on screen during the program, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us discuss them. And we are joined tonight by journalist and author Christina Patterson and The Spectator's assistant editor Cindy Yu. Welcome both. Great to see you. So let's start with the Sunday Telegraph, and it's on the front page near the headline, UK warships lack missiles to take out Houthi bases. One of the stories I mentioned there. Under-equipped navy's inability to strike land targets is a scandal. That's what a former top brass, as they call him in the Sunday Telegraph, calls him. I don't know about scandal, certainly a worry. Christina?
Well, there seems to be a continuing theme emerging over, in particular, the last week, which is that our armed forces just aren't up to it. They've been increasingly cut, and a number of top army people and former army people are now speaking out. And as the world is becoming increasingly unstable, then this is clearly a worry. In fact, there's even been talk in the last few days of possible conscription. And, for example, if Trump does become president of the US, which is, of course, a horrific thought. And if he does, as he has said he will, end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours, which would only happen by him essentially saying, yeah, Putin, go ahead, take the land you want, it's yours. Then, of course, that would be seen as a go-ahead for Putin to continue with his expansionist plans. And then there's a very real possibility of more war in Europe in years to come. So yet again, we have joined the US in military action, in this case against the Houthis, in order to make a statement about us being, special relationship and all the rest of it. But the reality is we can't really match our words with our action and with our resources.
Cindy, what do you make of it?
I think this also comes today as the Telegraph on Saturday talks about how the US is thinking about putting nuclear weapons back onto UK soil as part of its plans to kind of bolster the US military forces, I guess, in the UK. And those were nuclear weapons that were taken out in 2008. So I think what it really shows is that between 2008 and 2024, the 16 years, the world is a very much different place now. The reason those weapons were taken away was because the Cold War was assumed to be over. Clearly, that may have led to some complacency in the British military forces as well, even though senior officials have been warning for years, actually, that we are lacking certain kinds of capabilities. But I guess in the last few years, whether it's the situation in the Middle East or in Ukraine or rising China, indeed, it's making us think again, well, is this kind of military that's actually fit for the future? And we can ally with America on all sorts of things, but as Christina says, if America is not reliable, then that's a different picture altogether.
So do you think we will see changes over the coming years to both the military or, our attitude to spying or various things?
Well, I think the problem is it's not actually that, I don't think it's the armed forces who've been complacent. I think it's governments have been just cutting everything. I mean, cutting all our public services, and I think they have been complacent. And I think it's a weird thing that the Tories are meant to be very hot on security, and they have been extremely cold on security. And they've a number of very senior people in the armed forces have said that we are really not in a position now to kind of take any significant role in any major conflict, and that's very frightening.
Okay, let's go to another story, still in the Sunday Telegraph, linked to the government. And this is Badenoch ousts chairman of the post office, and this is a story that actually our city editor, Mark Kleinman, broke a little earlier today, that the chairman of the post office is being forced out of the role amid frustration in Whitehall over the post office. Cindy, what do you make of the story, and what do you think might be behind it? Why now?
Well, the thing is, Henry Staunton, the chairman who's just been forced out, only took the job in December 2022. So he wasn't there in that job when a lot of this historic scandal was happening. And so it does feel like it's actually coming from a place of the government having frictions in dealing with the post office, in trying to change the structures to do with it. Whitehall is basically saying, there are appointments with senior personnel, there's disagreements over how quickly the compensation should be paid to former postmasters, all of that kind of stuff that's causing friction, where Henry Staunton seems to have disagreed with the government, and Kemi Badenoch has just said, well, you can go then, because we need to fix this. And I think what it shows is basically the political toxicity or the sensitivity around the story about how the government really realises it needs to fix this very, very quickly. And if it can't, then it risks kind of blowing back on it even more. I mean, at the moment, it's only Sir Ed Davey who seems to be taking most of the flak at the moment.
Because there's so much attention on the story. Now, obviously a lot of this dates back decades, but now attention and focus is on them about what they're doing right now.
Yes, but I think that, it's a complex web, isn't it, this story, because so many people seem to be complicit. And as you say, Cindy, Ed Davey seems to have got a ludicrous amount of the hostility in relation to this. I think the thing is, the government has changed its story, because I think the general sense was, let's make this go away. And so the government, of course, the post office is partially funded by the government. And so I think I think because the public mood has changed, the government is now addressing this in a different way. And Kemi Badenoch presumably thought that Henry wasn't doing a good enough job. But it sounds to me as though there are other political things going on there as well.
Yeah, we're just on that, on Christina's point. It's Kemi Badenoch. She is the front runner with the Tory grassroots when it comes to the next Tory leader. We are going into an election year, so everything has to be seen in that light a little bit too.
Exactly, yeah.
Speaking of election year, let's go to the Mirror, the Sunday Mirror front page. Picture of Rishi Sunak. Tories are rigging rules on election. They have been accused of changing the rules to boost their votes at the general election. Cindy, how are they accused of trying to do this?
So this is actually a relatively exceptional warning from the Electoral Commission about rules that the Tories are going to put in next week through Parliament, basically upping the upper limit on party donations to £35 million, also allowing expats to vote. At the moment, there's a 15-year limit on whether or not they can vote, 15 years out of the country, and they can no longer vote. The Tories are thinking about changing that, and then also requiring voter ID at the polling booths as well. All of these have potentially big repercussions for how basically the voter turnout looks next election, especially if they can get rich expats overseas to turn out for them in their marginal constituencies, or maybe exclude certain voters from the polling booths by requiring ID. It's all a bit up in the air at the moment in terms of the actual implications.
Christina?
Yeah, I mean, it does. I think the Election Commission is a non-partisan and independent body, and I think we should be alarmed when people, attached to it generally are very scrupulous about doing their job professionally and well. So if they are saying that this is rigged, I think we need to take that seriously. And I think, given how things were in this country under Boris Johnson in particular, and how he didn't hide his attempts to change the rules in order to favour him in a rather Trumpian way, I think we should be a bit worried. And I particularly think the stuff about voter ID. Everybody knows that young people are less likely to vote, less likely to have voter ID. So this does look as an attempt to rig things, which, luckily is unlikely to work.
Let's go to a different kind of story, but one that has obviously, been in the headlines a lot. And this is the Sunday Express, page 7. And, of course, those horrific stabbings in Nottingham. And this shock claim, knife killer knew what he was doing, two consultant psychiatrists concluded. The killings were obviously horrific, and now these massive questions of whether basically, Valdo Calocane should have been stopped before.
Yes, and a lot rests on how sane he is assumed to have been. I mean, the court's experts, 3 different experts, said that he was too schizophrenic to be allowed any kind of responsibility, so it was manslaughter. But actually, the victims' families and those who are supporting them have reached out to other psychiatrists who say that he should have known what he was doing. So a lot rests on basically how much responsibility he can be claiming. And given that the killings come as a result of a multi-agency failure in the first place, I do feel like the CPS has a lot of pressure on this one to at least get the sentencing right.
Yeah, obviously, unsurprisingly, the families of the victims, we've heard some very strong words from them.
Yeah, this is just a heartbreaking case. And as Cindy says, it's a multi-agency failure because it seems that the NHS let Valdo Calocane down, and the families and the police also didn't take great efforts to investigate and claimed, for example, that he was sofa surfing when he did, in fact, have a permanent address. But I think the key, I've had very strong views about the depiction of people with schizophrenia. My late sister had schizophrenia, and it's an illness that is very often misunderstood. And obviously, the vast majority of people with schizophrenia do not go around murdering people. And I think that it's a fine line as well. You can't really say whether someone is sane or not sane. But I think that the really salient thing in this story is that the families do not feel that justice has been done. And given that they can never, ever get their loved ones back and will be not particularly anyone, but, to be a mother and to lose your child is probably one of the worst things that could ever happen to you. And to be living with that anguish forever and feel that the system has let you down is a double tragedy. So I think that there have been serious failings in this.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. Still with me, the journalist and author Christina Patterson and the Spectator's assistant editor, Cindy Yu. So thanks so much for staying with us. Let's go straight to the Sunday Times. Very interesting story here on their front page. Exposed foreign students get secret route to top universities. Basically, that some foreign students, who of course now pay vastly more than British students, and now even EU students paid the same as, they used to pay the same as UK. Now they pay the same as other foreign students, are basically being given an easy ride in. Cindy, what did you make of the story?
Yeah, so it's an investigation from the Sunday Times where they went undercover to talk to some of these middlemen going from families to universities and basically taking a large cut in the process. And some of these CEOs apparently are paid more than some university vice chancellors, which is quite incredible. It just shows you the amount of money involved in this. And that's because foreign students pay up to £38,000 a year compared to a domestic student of around £9,000 a year. But it also means that, if you have A-level grades equivalent to D, D and E, which is not very impressive in the UK, you can still get onto Russell groups through these kind of backdoor methods of this so-called one-year pathway, after which you go on to the proper undergraduate degree. So it's a big scandal, if everything is as it seems from the report. There are no loopholes or anything like that, because people in this country struggle to get onto university courses with much better grades. And there's also a question about reliance, of course, of the higher education system on foreign students.
But I suppose, Christina, I mean, if you're looking at some foreign students paying effectively 4 times as much as some, as domestic national students, and a lot of universities being short of cash, you can see how something like this would happen.
Absolutely. And the other day I heard an academic justifying this whole thing by saying that because people were arguing, but foreign students are taking places from British students. And he was saying, no, actually, foreign students are paying for subsidising British students, because if British students paid the real cost, then the fees would be much higher. So there is that argument. But, and when this flashed up on my phone earlier today, I thought, we'll know that already. But actually, the details are pretty shocking, not least, as Cindy says, the fact that some of the CEOs of these agencies are paid more than vice-chancellors, and vice-chancellors are not exactly underpaid, often earning several times what the Prime Minister earns. But I think what's really shocking about this is that it's lowering, not just lowering academic standards in terms of the reputations of universities and what a university place and course is worth and what it says if you're doing a degree at that place, but it's lowering the standard of teaching. Because if you are in a lecture room or a tutorial group with people who don't have anything like the level of knowledge you have, or the English language skills, and the lecturers are having to put enormous amounts of effort into adapting their teaching to accommodate essentially people who shouldn't be there in the first place according to normal academic standards, then that really is a disgrace. And I think it shows how broken the funding model is for British universities, because they are technically run as businesses, but they're not really businesses. So they're a kind of peculiar hybrid that is very uncomfortable, not least for academics. A number of my friends are academics. And when the student becomes a consumer, and if, for example, they're studying creative writing and they're not that brilliant, and you say they're not that brilliant, and they're paying vast amounts in order to be told they're not that brilliant, it's very awkward.
Cindy, we've got 40 seconds, but do you think that then if the system is just not working, as Christina says, then what could make it work? Or are we looking at a model like the United States where students really are consumers?
Well, one thing that could make it work, but it's not going to happen, is more funding for the higher education system, so that academics are not reliant on these kind of cash cows of foreign students. But that's not going to happen.
OK, well, we'll see. Who knows? Cindy and Christina, thank you both.